thanks for joining us with Neil Binderman. And I know many of you know him. Others of you don't know him yet. And it's really my pleasure to get a follow-up with Neil on this. So my name is Sarah Box, and I'm the host of this event, if you will. And like I said, we've got Ken Fay here. Ken Fay is an award-winning film producer, director, and he is a friend of mine as well, someone I've come to work with. He's a colleague. And he is the person who connected me to Neil in the first place. You can see Summer Zifko. Summer is the online business manager for Sarah Box Coaching and Consulting. She is all things technical and brainiac, super smart, super strategic as well. So the three of us have been working behind the scenes to help Neil get the word out on this. With that, let's just dive in. And Neil, I have a little bit of an introduction that I want to share with folks about you, but then we're just going to go right into the presentation, okay, or your discussion with folks. So for those of you who don't know Neil, he's the founder of Lifestyle Health Foundation. And his work has been inspired by his own experiences in trauma, those of other people, and he's used that to support the work of the British Society of Lifestyle Medicine, and as well as running the Primary Care and Community Neurology Society and the Community Therapist Network, and with a great team at Innervate, helps run the Society of Research and Rehabilitation. And if you listen to the podcast, episode number 230, that we actually released in April, Neil and his team officially launched the SmartTracker app, which is what today is all about, in March. But during that interview, I asked him if he would come back and do a session like this so that folks that we believe need to know about this so they can help folks who are working through trauma, or maybe they don't even know they're experiencing trauma, be able to put the pieces together and start healing from that. And when I talked with Neil, I realized there are a lot of other applications for this tool as well. And that's why you were asked to be on, because our belief is that you will actually see some things that help in different ways than maybe had even been imagined. So with that, what I'd like to do, Neil, is to ask you to share a little bit about yourself, the context for why are we here today? Like, how did you get there?
Thanks a lot, Sarah. For me, it started 7 years ago when I had my own traumatizing experience, which is mentioned in the podcast, being diagnosed with a brain tumor, and appreciating the significance at that moment, really, of the words that I'd heard, the emotions that I'd gone through, I was going through, and then the realization of the significance of what that I'd experienced and how that had an impact on my values as well. That whole package really led me to think more closely about how to develop something that could really help to reflect those issues over emotions and values and the impact that it was having on my quality of life. I'd previously developed a tool many years ago about quality of life, and we actually needed to update it. And as a result of going through what I went through, the process of developing SmartTracker started. So, and then it was as a result of really realizing that my own trauma suddenly allowed me to open up other areas of trauma, becoming trauma informed, and led me towards learning about my father's own trauma and the significance of what happened to him as a child. That led me to realize that for him, again, the significance of that emotion, those emotions that must have hit him at that point, and how that played out in his life going forward. So, I think in essence that's what has driven me in this area of looking at emotions and values in life.
How did that lead then to creating SmartTracker? So, one is the appreciation of it, but you went on to create a tool that, you hope to be really widely distributed and used.
Yeah, absolutely. I just knew that I from what I'd experienced, that I wasn't alone in thinking that the emotions were a significant part of how it was impacting on my quality of life. And it was the passion around quality of life, if I'm honest, that led me towards the development of the SmartTracker. It was my dad's work around quality of life that I realized that it's so important and it's been neglected in many aspects of care, to look at quality of life in a way that reflected the individual, rather than most quality of life measures are general quality of life issues. They're well-being related, perhaps. I don't see them as quality of life in the true sense of what quality of life is. And it's that passion around quality of life and reflecting the personal nature of it that drove me to want to do something with SmartTracker.
That's a good distinction. Because oftentimes I know here in the States, we use quality of life. There are national measures. Here's quality of life measures, if you will. They don't tend to be personalized, like to our own experiences and what matters. So that's an interesting distinction for how you're approaching the SmartTracker app. Neil, just up front, I know it's early in the launch of your app, but if it were 5 years from now, where would you hope SmartTracker would be used and the impact it would have?
I would hope that anybody who had gone through some significant impact in their life, and it had an impact on their quality of life, that they would be using SmartTracker in a way that would demonstrate to the health service what impact it was having on their quality of life, and therefore how the health service can support a person's quality of life. At the moment, it has no way of doing that, in my personal view, because it's not using anything that really tells you anything about a person's quality of life. If you know that values, a person's values and a person's emotions are fundamental aspects of their life, I'll be blunt, how the hell can you measure somebody's quality of life unless you've actually taken those into consideration?
Okay. And just because we're using, I realize that we're using English, we're all speaking English. However, when you say health, for you, what is encompassed in that? Because I know here it could be broad, it could be super narrow. And I think before we get into the SmartTracker and you're going through that, which is next in the science of it, it'd be good for folks to know the context that when we say health, what are you looking at in that umbrella?
Well, for me, the concept of health is you are being with no attachments to any form of illness or any disability in your life, or anything that's holding you back from really enjoying your quality of life. Really, you know, if you can't go forward enjoying your quality of life, it's a difficult one, really, in that sense, in terms of defining.
Well, let me make it more basic. Okay, so when we're thinking about health providers, right? So how big is your description of health providers? For instance, I could see it being someone called a mental health provider, a behavioral health provider, a medical provider, a habilitation or rehabilitation provider. So I just didn't know, like, as people, because there are people listening here who are professionals as well as lay people. So I just want to see if we're...
So emotional health,
okay,
is how we position this.
Okay,
is emotional health.
Perfect.
And people who work in that field of emotions and emotional health, and that's from children right through to people of grandparenting age.
Okay, well then let's move on. And if you're good with it, let's talk about the science behind the app. I know that you've studied neurology, you've got all that in your background. And then you also tested the app. So can you talk about the science behind SmartTracker?
Yeah, that is where I'd say the sciences come from a trauma-informed approach and learning from a trauma-informed science, and listening to and learning from several people, over 600, who have gone through a form of trauma, and listening to how that trauma has had an impact on emotions and emotional well-being, and looking at that aspect of the significance of that from a point of view of how that then impacts on what's important for them in their life. And I've got one slide to just to highlight this aspect of where I believe becoming trauma-informed makes a significant impact. And I just want to, if I can, just quickly share that.
Absolutely.
Let me just pull and do this. It's about the significance of emotions. Some of the people on here have done this. So I posted this on my social media. I would like you to put in here, in the chat, one word that you think connects all 4 of these pictures. Yeah, there are people doing this. I think I've seen it, but it's great. It's fine. So, but what they won't realize is what others have said as well in the past. So now that we've done that, that's really interesting. So this is what has come out, not only from you. I prepared this well before you came on. And these were the words that were showing up in asking people a question. The ones that were coming up the most in this: care, comfort, and love. I'm going to do a survey on this, actually, a bigger survey to get a much bigger level of response, because I'm really interested in this. Because, like quite a few people who've done it, one person, 2 people here, comfort is one of the factors that I see is very significant here. And basically, what I'm trying to get across here with this is the need for comfort that we seem to see, and because we see it here, when we go through trauma, there is an instinctive need to be comforted, which feeds back to these types of primitive response there. So when you walk into a field with sheep and the lambs are out, if you watch them, they will run to their mother because they're worried, and they go and suckle immediately underneath. They get in there. Comfort that you're getting here in the man with the blanket is how I felt. When I was traumatized, they had to get me a blanket to comfort me because I was shivering. I needed a sweet cup of tea, etc. The comfort that the child is getting from the mother, the comfort that the baby's getting from its thumb, it's about security, safety. And that is a fundamental issue as well that will play out later in life too. Because the one thing after you've been traumatized you're looking for is a level of comfort. And from a neuroscience perspective, we know that the brain areas that get stimulated are the reward levels that you're looking for in comfort, and you want that sense of reward and etc. And this is the issues that come around in terms of areas to do with addiction, comfort eating, being overweight, that may have happened because of trauma, etc. So that aspect is only something that recently realized myself. So I'll stop the sharing of that particular one there. And I think it's a fundamental aspect of why emotions are so important to us as major drivers. And as I say, comfort is a sense of emotion as well that comes where you get a sense of emotion from that comfort that's driving things. And it's that feeds into the SmartTracker as well. That aspect of emotions drives the aspects of the SmartTracker and also how it influences your values as well. And I'll come on to that when we look at the SmartTracker in terms of the significance of emotions and values through another personal experience.
So since we were talking about the science and beta testing, Ken, I know you were one of the beta testers on this, and I don't know if any of the other participants on here were, but is there something you would add to what Neil has shared so far about the tool? Just your reaction to it from that kind of connecting the emotion to the values, and that piece of it. And then we're going to be walking through the tool in detail. But I thought this would be a good point to ask you for what it was like to use the tool.
Sure. Yeah. It was an eye-opening experience that this would even exist for someone like me. What I mean is, yes, I'm a filmmaker and I do all that sort of work, but I'm also a trauma survivor. And so by connecting emotions to the mental state, to the physical reaction, I never really did that in the process or was really coached in that and coming through trauma. So it was kind of an interesting way of looking at it through the lens of emotion as having that major of an impact. Now, we all get scared, we all get afraid, we all get anxious, we all want comforting, all those things, right? All those human experiences. But I found that this was kind of a pointer that helped focus, I should say, the energies to make a change in a certain direction on a certain level that I had not thought of before. So for me, that's how it affected. And just having that out there, it was helpful.
Let's talk about the app experience. And I think it'll be more realistic when we can actually see the structure of it and what it's like to be in it, if you will. And I will tell the folks today, I actually opened the app and got in it, but didn't have time to play in it and get benefit from it. So this is really this section that we've carved out here so that Neil can walk us through the structure and the intended use for those pieces of it. What does it look like for an individual user like me, or what it looks like from a provider's perspective, from a behavioral health healer or other providers' perspective, and then just how we can use it to look at changes over time. And if at the individual level, say I start working with a provider, how can I share my information so they can have the richness of what I already know, right? So that we can work in concert. So with that, Neil, are you ready to get us behind the scenes and dive us into it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So what I'll do is I'll share a first little video clip to show you the process of the simple registration process once you go to the smarttracker.org.uk website. So this is just where you select the personal account from choice of personal or professional. So you go into the personal account, you then would go to the stage of completing your details, which is done fairly quickly. I'm going to run through this video very quickly so you can see it's very simple. In the US, you would go all the way down to the bottom and there is an option for outside of the UK. I can't remember the term that is used, but it's rest of the world. So you would select that. And we have now added in a function for the resources, which I'll show you, which is for resources in different countries. So and you just select through your date of birth and everything, your password. Just to stop you a second on there, the access code. So this is an important point because the access code is what links your record to a healthcare professional if you're working with a healthcare professional, and they would give you an access code that you would use. That would mean that you are sharing it with them, but it's your permission you're giving through that, putting that code in, and then you would also tick a box that would take you through that process. And I'll just do that, and that you can see that there's an access code going in as a demo, and you tick the terms and conditions, and then you tick that's, and the terms and conditions are there to read. I'm just scrolling through this quickly, and then that, and then you would select the box to share with a health professional, and then that gives the permission to it, links up the two accounts. So that's the that stage. Then the other next part, and I'll just take you through that one quickly, is the stage of looking through when you put in details that you may have had.
So the one thing for folks while we're waiting for his share to be successful for him, you don't have to share your record with anybody. Neil mentioned that. But should you want to, you can, and you can rescind that access at any time. So you are, as the individual user, the owner of what exists, who you share it with, if anybody. So, I mean, that's a really important piece.
Hold on.
Graham mentioned that he really likes the protection and security around the answers, or as he's done in the beta, have a serious conversation with yourself. And maybe a little bit later, Graham, you could speak to that for folks who are kind of curious about it. Okay, we see it now.
Good. All right, that's good. So this is where you put in your life events. If you have a life event, you can select no, and you can still use the tool with no life events, which is absolutely fine. So if I just press the play button, this will just show you. And we've actually updated this text on the latest version to confirm and reiterate that you're not sharing this information with anyone. And I will show you what we see from an admin point of view, that we cannot see any private information unless you decide to share it. And so this is just going to run through. I'm not going to take you through all of it. Basically, that's where you put the information. This was actually entered in by my colleague, Mike Hutton, who developed the SmartTracker with me from the IT side. And this is all genuine information that he actually witnessed. And he saw this happen as a child. And so he was putting this in to demonstrate how it works. So I will stop sharing that video because I think it will be useful to show you the actual live site, because I think there's more in there to show you than.
Now, Neil, when folks go to your website, though, if they wanted to look at those videos, are those there for them to look?
They're not actually on there as such at the moment, but the plan is that we will do that.
Perfect.
So I'm going to take you into my account. So once you have registered your basic details, which includes the events that you may have had, you get immediately to the dashboard. So you've registered an account, but you can't go any further with the account until you complete the personal values and emotions. So if you go and do the track will take you to this point, which is going to be to fill your personal values in. So the personal values, and mine are selected already, are listed here. So you can have, you only need to select from 5 personal values. That's a minimum that you'd want in there. And if you can't see one that suits your personal values, what you feel is important to you, then you can actually add it in. So you just add in a custom value, you create your own, and then it gets added into the system. So if, for example, you're working with a child and the child's using certain words which they're not reflected in here, then you can put them in and you can add those in. And that is the same for the emotions as well. So when it comes to doing the next step, for each value, you then select 8 emotion words that you would use now and going forward. It takes a bit of time to do this bit of the process, but I really believe that it's well worth the commitment and the time to get the most out of what you're using here. You select your emotions from here, and if you don't see, these are the most common words from the survey that we did. We know that these are generally the most common words that people go for. But then if you don't see those, you select here, and there are loads more that you can select from. And if you still don't see what you're looking for, you press in the custom emotion. And as I say, again, with children, you can use the custom emotions. The next step is important, but the system has already does this for you. So the emotions are rated in terms of negative, neutral, or positive. This is the extent to which we have gone with the personalization of this, because it may be that an emotion word is neutral for one person, but it may be negative or it may be positive for somebody else. And so we've set them to be generally in the categories that we put them in, so that you don't have to do it. But if you want to make the change to the type of emotion it might be, you can do that. And you can do it at that point there. So you do that for each one of your values. You go through your values, you do each one, and that's what highlights underneath there. And they're all in there. And so that is then you then save that, and then that goes into your record. Is there anything at this point, Sarah, that you want to ask?
I have a question, of course. So when you talked about that, and they're rated negative, neutral, or positive, I thought I understood you to say we could change that if it doesn't. So like say you and I might rate something. So is that just moving the radio button over to where I want it to be?
Yeah, absolutely. So I scroll down. You just simply move that radio button across to neutral if you want, or negative, wherever you want it. And then you'd press the save button and it gets saved.
So again, that's related to the value I place on how I feel or my emotions related to that, right? Not necessarily a normed value.
Absolutely. No, it's about how you feel.
Okay.
And that's so important. Because how we feel and our emotions, they can get conditioned as well. And the significance of an emotion in terms of what it can mean to somebody. I'll give an example here because I think it's quite useful. If you take anger, right, and you look at maybe a child who's an infant, and they feel within them something's happened, and they're very angry. You see them having a temper tantrum or whatever it is, and they suddenly get the attention from someone as a result of that emotion. If that happens on a number of occasions, the chances are that the sense that they're getting from that, of getting recognition for that anger, they're getting somebody coming to see them or whatever it might be, they're getting attention, that could go into their behaviors for later on in life. So that, you get road rage, for example, the feeling of anger, there may be something that in the past they felt, oh, I get something from that, so I feel that's why I'm feeling angry. And it's that kind of sense of potentially conditioning. That's why I think it's important people have that opportunity to rate in here, negative, neutral, or positive. Because when it comes to talking through things, you have a lot to discuss. So now that that's happened, you would then go in to do a track. And I'll go into the track process. So you now have the opportunity. Now I'll do one very quickly because I think it will make it helpful. So my first one is ability to communicate. And I'm going to do this quite randomly because I think it's, so I feel relaxed and I feel quite happy about it. If I wanted to say anything about how I'm feeling or anything that relates to that at the moment, I would just type it into there, press continue, and then go to the next value, which is independence. I feel thankful. I feel happy. I feel confident about that, and press continue. How's my home life? I feel loved. Again, I'm happy, thankful. Press continue for that. I then looking at my family relations. Again, I'm happy, loved. Press continue, and my mental functioning. I'm happy with that. I'll say I'm fairly relaxed, and I'm thankful. So I've done it really quite quickly, randomly. And that's me done a track. And it shows immediately there's a summary score of 2.6. And that little emoji changes slightly depending on the score. If it was a negative score, it would look sad, a little sad. It's only there to give you a quick little bit of fun, to be honest, in there, just doing that. But this is the important part where you can see how you're scoring things. Now, what you'll see is there is a value of 3 on one side and -3 on the other. That's because of the way it works as well, that 3 was the most used number of emotions. And so anything that's weighted against that, and you can see where the different lines measures fit for each one of those. But the beauty about this is you can see how the person's feeling about that aspect of their life. I've scored this generally pretty happy, which is great. Now I can compare my tracks. So I can compare 2 different scores. I can go back to that date and I can compare it with that date. And I can see immediately from there a slight difference in my scoring. Interestingly, 4 in my independence in this case, 3 on home life over here. Now, one of the fundamental aspects of this is, and I'd be interested to see if people agree with my thinking on this too, because I've spoken to a few people in relation to this. Independence has the most emotions. If you put the most emotions next to something, whether it is they're negative, neutral, or positive, the more emotional you are about something, the more significant and the more important it probably is for you. It's as simple as that. It really is. That's the significance of your emotions. I pick independence because that's the one that when I came out of hospital from brain surgery, I had my license taken away from me for a year, and my sense of independence or freedom took an absolute smacker. And if I had been asked how I was feeling about my level of independence at that point, I know that I would have felt very emotional and I would have scored it with a lot of emotions. And I think if you know that significance and then you work with children on that basis as well, then maybe you get a better understanding of what's important for them.
So do folks who are listening have any initial thoughts about just this comparison piece before Neil continues on with this? Or like any light bulbs come off like, wow, that would be great if I could do X, Y, and Z with this in this setting?
This is Jessica Flood-Abris. I could see this being a really good tool for therapists, right, with their clients to be able to track their progress. I recognize this is kind of like a case management tool, so it's nice to have that visually broken down.
That's interesting. Yeah, interesting to hear. It absolutely would be useful from that perspective. That's exactly what it's there for, as a therapist tool to use. And the other aspect, sorry.
Well, I was going to ask, just thinking from the emotional piece of it, and like you explained that your increased appreciation and value on independence, right? After you didn't have it, it was just snatched away for a time. And then you worked really hard in the in-between time to regain it, so it has even higher value for you. But I'm thinking about people, professionals who work with people who, whether they're in acknowledged trauma or situational trauma, or their lives have been upended, where I just thinking like, even if it's in a group where you're able to say, okay, when you started understanding X, Y, and Z, this is where you were. Here's where you are. And then you've got these side by sides. It would seem to me it allows for a conversation, having given that permission to a provider to ask the question, what's changed? You know, I see you were feeling really good here, and then you're less so now. What's changed, right? Maybe it's something they're not even aware of. But when I look at this, it seems to be a really useful conversation tool, as well as, I'm not a licensed provider, but a diagnostic or at least a dive deeper tool, as well as very validating.
Yeah, I had a couple of questions. So this is kind of based on cognitive behavior therapy, right? Like moving towards your values. And I guess, so coming from a mental health perspective, I don't know if other people have on this call, but you're like the accumulated childhood trauma, the ACEs, was that something that drove some of this?
Oh, right. Yeah.
So I'm sure like the ACEs, you know, that makes people feel really uncomfortable and brings up emotions that are not always reflective of like the environment that they're in. So I could really see how this would be helpful to try to ground people, because that's kind of like acceptance and commitment therapy, which is a form of cognitive behavior therapy, is like, hey, maybe don't always put so much emphasis on your emotions, more on the values, and see where your values are moving. Is that kind of where you're headed with this?
That's exactly how it can work as well. Yeah, it is values and emotions are so connected, you know, and in terms of what can happen in a child trauma, it has huge impact on what becomes important for them as well in later in life, etc. And it's that aspect of one of the reasons why this tool has come about is the one thing that I recognized through my father's trauma, which was as a child. And I know there are a couple of people here, I think, as well, who may have had similar instances as childhood-related issues. If you don't resolve those issues, it's got to show itself somehow in life, either physically or mentally. And I hope with all my heart that this tool can help to get those emotions out so that they're not stuck and they need to be dealt with. They need to be able to, so you need to understand why a person's feeling the way they're feeling and why their things are important to them because of something fundamental that could have happened in their life. And this is why I've developed this tool.
Neil, we've got another question that was in the chat that related to the structure. So you compared two discrete dates in there, but Christine's asking if there's a way to take the information and show it graphically over time. So like select all for every assessment. Oh, how nice. There you go, Christine.
So the idea here is this is a trend for the overall track. In development, there will be a drop down, and in there, you will be able to look at each value, each individual value, and you will be able to see how that is changing over time in terms of the emotions that you have scored it. And then you will be able to go into each one of these points and look at the track, as I've just done. You can then go in and realize, for example, they scored home life. Maybe in my case it's 2, but in somebody else's case, they scored their home life as a -2. And the reason was the dog died. That's important from a point of view of the significance of how people will feel. And so that might have been written in here in terms of the details, where it says no details at the moment. In some of mine, I just put in tests, and there's not one in there. But if I can find one, I would do it, but I won't. But you can see the value. So the trends is exactly how that will work.
And you can
Now,
change the past 3 months to past month, past 6 months, whatever, right?
That will change as well. Yes, that they are. So the past 6 months, if you wanted to, the last, obviously I haven't got enough at the moment. So it's just the past 3 months. So, but as you keep using it, you'll have that information. Not only have you got that, but you can also set reminders to complete it. So you go into the account, you go down to the bottom, you put set your reminder, and you can select whenever you want a reminder to complete it. This is also where if you wanted to connect up with a health professional, they've given you an access code. You put your code in there, you tick the box, you save the changes, and then you are connected with a health professional or a therapist to do that. But in addition to that, so if I go into the Smart Score and Diary, that's where you get your list of scores. So you can see a quick summary of your scores from there as well. And then if you go into resources, we don't just leave you to not have any access to resources. We're building a platform of resource information on there. And if you click on, for example, relationship and friendships, you can go to a whole load of resources that sit on the web. And what we've built, which is not shown on here, unfortunately, and we've done it not on time, is depending on which country you have registered from, you will then have resources that are specific to that country. So we will build resources. So in the States, there's lots of not-for-profit organizations, and we will list not-for-profit organizations for free on this. And they will go on to, so that you can then get the information and support that you may need.
Will you be looking to your users to help to point out the resources that are kind of like, say they're in their area? Jessica, as an example, might say, hey, in Nevada, these resources need to be in there. You know, would you be looking for?
Yeah, we will work with, we're very happy to work with users, etc., to do that and to build that up, because I can take you into the back end to show you how we can do all of that. Just look, and also users get the chance to give us any feedback, any comments, any ideas that they would like to see built in. Then we can put that into there as well. And then just back into the dashboard, you quickly can get into all these different areas from the dashboard as well. The Smart Score has been trademarked basically, so that because of the way it works. So if I just quickly log out of this, I will go into a different account. So this is the admin account, just to show you that the only information we see are ages, female, male, events, etc. And we can add, so this is where we also can add in. So if we go to users, for example, just at the top, that's it. That's all we see. No personal data, nothing at all, other than the date of birth, but that's it, and your email address. If we want to contact you, we can do that. Then to go into, for example, the category, the resources, that one has still, that's unfortunately, I think, we are. So I can add in different resource categories into there. And that, unfortunately, that server error happened earlier on today with the developers, because we were playing with it in the different countries. But if I went into those resources, that's where we add in the resources and add in information about them, etc. As well. We can also, within the back end, if anybody wants us to add in additional, for example, values, we can do that in the system as well, but they get added as people add them themselves. And the same with emotions. And you'll see I've added in the countries. We'll now create any country in there we want. And I think that, from a point of view of
It gives you a basic sense of who's using it, not how they're using it, right? So it helps you keep the development going and know where there's gaps.
So one of the visions for this, because I've got a young girl who's been working on this with me, who's had her own trauma. When she started working on it and using it, she immediately recognized how, because she's got a friend who also has had similar traumatic issues. And she just said, I can see how I could use this with my friend. And I thought, absolutely. So what we'll do eventually is as this platform builds with more and more people on it, we will give you, the user, the opportunity to share your record with who you wish to share it with. But it's you making that decision. And if you want to share it with a friend so that they can talk and help and support you as friends, that's your decision. And and so it's the same approach with health professionals. There will be a very unique coding structure which makes sure it's very safe and secure, and only you, if you give them a code, that we know then that the code's been given out by the person themselves, and it's therefore their instruction. And I hope that this becomes a platform where it can be used in that way, so that more openness about talking about emotions can happen. Because
so Neil, that's perfect timing. We have a question that Johnson asked in the chat about that. Like, is there any facility either now or maybe in the future it's planned, or you guys have talked about on the development side, to be able to build a community between the users?
Exactly, Johnson. That's it. That's exactly what we want to build eventually, is a community of people who can support each other, you can help each other, and emotions become something that you can talk about freely. Because we still have issues over, certainly in certain parts of the world, it's more easy to talk about your emotions, I think, than other parts. And the more we can be free about talking about emotions and important values, etc., the better.
There's also an important comment that Christine left, and that was that she likes the resource function. Her employer has an app that provides resources, but it's a dump, right? Which isn't to diminish it, but it takes more filtering through. So I understand that when I am frustrated or stressed and need a resource, I am not in my cognitive best, like, oh, let's see, what are my priorities? It's like, I'm done, I'm moving on. So that's a thumbs up for how you guys have designed this, Neil.
Thank you. Well, a lot of thought, as you can see, a huge amount of thought has gone into the whole thing. And one of the other aspects I want to draw your attention to is this aspect of recognizing lived experiences. And it's something that I'm quite passionate about as well over here. We don't always recognize that healthcare professionals have had lived experiences. And one of the reasons why Chris Freer, who is on this call, is a member of the steering committee of the Person-Centered Neurosciences Society. He's a therapist, but he also lives with MS, and he won't mind me saying that. He lives with secondary progressive MS, and he's an amazing man who's turned his life around. And Ken's met him, I think, briefly. He inspires anybody. He inspired me, and it was getting to know him and my own experience that I made the decision that we needed to have people on the steering committee of the Person-Centered Neurosciences Society who had lived experiences. And so we have a doctor, a consultant emergency medicine doctor who lives with Parkinson's. We have a nurse who lives with Parkinson's. We have a dietitian who's also on this call, I think he's still here, who lives with epilepsy and went to become a dietitian because he got onto the ketogenic diet and realized it had an impact on his life. Wonderful. We've got another person with MS. The whole point about this is a tool that recognizes that, as it says, you may be a health professional, have had a traumatizing lived experience. And that is so important. And this model that it's designed around is here. You have a life event. Generally, you would go, most cases, a free expression of emotions. But in some cases, it's so bad that you go into emotional turmoil. They get trapped. They get stuck. One of the things I hope is that SmartTracker will help you to draw those out. And then we can introduce you to the whole lifestyle health approach. So I hope that's been helpful to go through all that.
Yeah. So Neil, just one more piece of request from Johnson, and that somehow the resources can be rated, right? So over time, if they no longer are that great, they can be voted off the island, if you will. So just know for the development team, you've got people thinking about, oh, this would be great. But can you talk a little bit for us about your pricing model? Because I know sometimes people can be that, like, that's a driver. No,
absolutely. So for an individual, it's free. So if you're just an individual person, if you're an individual person wanting to use it for yourself, it's free. We have, however, got in there, if you would like to make donation to the Lifestyle Health Foundation, which of course is driving this as well, that would be appreciated. To use it as a health professional, as a business for your clients, or as an organization, then we have a licensing model, and that will be based on volume. So both a volume of therapists or professionals, however, and also patients. So if you've got 10 professionals, 10 therapists, and they've all, let's say, got 50 patients each, we'll work out a license model on that basis. So it could be, for example, you've got 200 clients in total, and it would be I'm going to pluck a figure out there at the moment, but about £2,000 for something like that, for it'll be an ongoing yearly license. But one of the aspects that we're working on around the modeling for this is the fact that it saves considerable time, potentially, with therapists. When the person has taken the time to go through and put in this information, and it's there for you to see, that can take quite a lot of time to get to that point. Now, it might be in some cases you actually work with your client to go through the registration process with them to complete that aspect of, well, what are the areas that are important to you? Let's go through that. Let's do a session on that. What are your emotions? Because actually, once you've done that, you have a whole great big piece of information that you can talk with them about. You then suddenly realize, well, this is what's important to me. Why is this important to me? Etc. There's loads and loads of stuff you suddenly can ask. I can see Ken nodding his head, which is great.
And Ken had made a comment about how useful it is when you think about providing a healthcare provider, a therapist, a really comprehensive view of who you are as a client, to be able to look at that and then have it as a check-in point as well. And then will there be, so you talked about in the professional, is the same pricing structure, do you think, for both nonprofit and for-profit, Neil, or are you looking at something different? I know that some of the providers are in a nonprofit environment.
At the moment, we haven't distinguished between the two. We have got experience of doing something similar in the past in the UK, and that's generally been working with the NHS trusts. Okay. And we've had a similar pricing model. What we can do, so the way we can package things, for example, is if it is a non-profit, then we would give our license for X number of clients, and then we can then, obviously they can add their resources and that information, that's all free. If you're a for-profit and you want to promote your resources, etc., then they would pay for that aspect along with their license to use with their health professionals and patients.
You have a blended revenue strategy. That's great. Okay, so what I'd like to do is to open this up for random questions from anybody. Maybe there's things we didn't talk about and you're thinking, yeah, I'm waiting for you to answer this. Now's the time to just put it out there or share your experiences with the tool if you've used it.
And Johnson's just asked about teachers using this. Absolutely. Yeah. It's another area of significance in terms of the importance of emotions and values between teachers and children. Totally. And we already work in the special educational needs field with another tool which we didn't develop, but we support the training of it. And that's with a Professor Pam Enderby, who works as a speech and language therapist for many, many years. And we work in special educational needs with that. So yeah, definitely can see it. This would be hugely useful for that as a starting point in the education sector.
Other questions or comments or experiences to share?
Well, I think a few people. Go on, Graham.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at this from the angle of a therapist using it. And one of the things for me over a few decades now is something I call focused motivational interviewing. So it narrows itself down. And I think that this tool is extremely good at doing that, which has already been mentioned by a number of people, whereby they are doing the focusing and not us. So it's a tool. I think the better you get at focused, what I call focused motivational interviewing, is the fact that they do most of the talking. And through that listening on our part, we're actually able to begin to identify perhaps where they are, or another way of looking at that would be to walk in their shoes. And I think the closer you can get to that, and I'm getting goosebumps right now. The closer you get to sharing that journey with them, the more they would respond to you. And for me, this tool, I think, is extremely good at doing that.
That's great, Graham. Thank you. Really appreciate that.
I would agree with Graham as a user for that, is that by going through that process of digging it through, you're actually be putting into words or thoughts what you're kind of feeling, so that you can then share that to help that walk that Graham's talking about. I think you need to connect. You need to have that human connection, right, to get into any healing.
Yeah.
And so it allows you to process a little bit. It's part of the processing, I think, after an event. I think that could be useful. That's how I found it.
Yeah, I mean, Ken, I totally agree. I think the other important bit is as the individual examines themselves, which the tool just has a natural way of making you do that almost, which sometimes from a therapy point of view, that can be quite tricky. You either start to come across almost like a teacher, where you quote lots of things which we all know are great, but it's the fact that they're not really ready for that. Whereas I think with a tool like this, you don't have that obstacle because they're doing the self-examining. And, none of us must ever forget that everything that we pick up and we learn is narrative-based. And so if they're doing more of the narrative and we're doing more of the listening, then you're, in my experience, going to be far more successful sooner. And obviously, they'll smile a lot more at you.
It's interesting, Graham. You said something there about listening that relates to something I was saying to Sarah about words and the significance of hearing words and listening. And that comes to, and this is where I think a tool like this can help us to certainly to a certain degree, because you'll then understand why they felt the emotions that they felt. But if you take the word, which I've said on a tweet somewhere, life limiting, right? If you've got two people using the same word, or one person using the word and the other person listening to that word, but they have a different understanding of what it means. One person thinks that life limiting is, well, it's just limiting what I can do in life. But the other person hearing it knows in their head, actually, it shortens my life. Yeah. If somebody uses and then they don't give the person the opportunity to tell the other person what they've heard, what they think they've heard, you're in for a disaster. And I think if you've got a tool like this that suddenly you can see emotions associated with something, you can then start to open up, well, why did that happen? What happened? And maybe you can rewind back to understand that actually it was purely down to a misunderstanding with a word.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, as I think, especially therapists that have got lots of experience, is that we often go back, even though we think we know what they've said and it sounds pretty clear, we could either ask them to build on that and how they, to try and explain that to me, how they're hearing that, seeing that, feeling that, whatever, so that we try to narrow down that gap between what we've heard or what we think we've heard and the accuracy as to around what they actually mean. But I think to reflect that back or mirror it, sometimes some people use, then we're more likely to be in tune with them again, so that we're accurately in their shoes and not that we think that we're in their shoes, because there's a big difference between the two.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally.
Any other comments or questions?
I saw Chris smiling at some point. I don't know whether that was because of something that was said. He's very quiet in the background there, but he isn't normally.
I'm just loving, I'm lapping up all the comments and everything. I'm just smiling. I just think it's a great tool. I have a question though. If I'm just a quick question. If you're working with a client as a therapist and they're filling in their feelings on a weekly or monthly basis, and all of a sudden there's a dip in their scoring, is there any way that the SmartTracker would alert the therapist?
Good question. We haven't got it in place yet, but we can build that in. We've done something previously, which is where, as I mentioned when we started doing the whole thing, I said I got experience of something else. We had that built into that. So yes, basically, if something was to be triggered by the way it was scored, there was something that looked strange, an email could be sent to the therapist who they're connected with.
Thank you for that, Neil. Thank you.
That brings up a thought too, that Chris, so if you had as a user, if you were in a panic situation, say it's soon after trauma, you're really diving deep in the dark about it and trying to get yourself out, and you went to a real bad state, would there be a panic button in the sense that you could actually press that would send an automatic email to a therapist and maybe to 2 or 3 other trusted people in your life so that they could then reach back into your life?
I can see it being built in. Oh, absolutely can. Yeah, you could, if you wanted to be, I think you'd have to be careful with that in terms of really getting to know the person that you're working with as well. And it might be that you don't have it. I'm thinking this I'm just thinking this through now. It may just be something you don't have it totally always available for everybody, that it might become something that becomes available for a particular reason. Because maybe, let's say, for example, you as the therapist working with the person get a sense that there's something not quite right. And then you as the therapist are able to put something into the account that allows that to be available. I wouldn't want to make it available to everybody because it could get abused for the wrong reasons.
Oh, absolutely. But for the right reasons, if you found out in your therapy session or what have you, that was a necessary tool for a season, right? Then that can be worked out between the folks involved and become its own little closed system. This is
you definitely build something in, no doubt about that. Johnson, you were going to ask is something about.
I was thinking along the lines of looking at the SmartTracker. It's very linguistically based. you'd have to have in a sense of these are words, a language base. And I'm wondering of the possibility of having a dictionary of emojis where for me sometimes instead of speaking a word out like anger, if I saw 5 or 6 different emojis, it can relate to levels of anger or levels of sadness or whatever. And I don't know if it exists yet, but I'm sure if it doesn't exist,
no,
it's going to be.
You're touching on something which a lot. I have thought about this a lot, and I think I'm not going to say we wouldn't do it, but what I will say, having read a lot of work by Lisa Feldman Barrett, who has written the book about how emotions are made and a number of other things that she's done. Her argument, and I think she's got a very strong argument, is that emojis don't have what we know as emotional granularity. A child won't get that sense of emotional granularity from emojis. The words are far more effective from that point. Yes, they may have issues with some children who may have difficulties with reading and whatever, but actually, generally speaking, listening to her research work, and she's been doing this for a long time, and also the other person is Professor Mark Brackett, who wrote Permission to Feel. He again is another person that talks about it, permission to feel, and again, it's about the use of words, and people need to do more around educating around the words to make sure that a child is able to express themselves in that way. But having said that, I still take your point about with some children, the sense of having a panel of emojis for something. Yes, we can definitely explore that. But anger is an interesting word that you just picked on. Some people would think of anger, but then you would then think of, well, what other word would you use that would associate with a feeling of anger? Frustration is one, but frustration and anger are 2 different types of emotions. So you've got to be very careful with selecting an emoji. And if they select that emoji because of it looks good or it feels right, you still need to explore with them what is the feeling.
The other, I take that. Thank you. To what you're saying, I think obviously I'm not speaking from an expert perspective, so I'm just asking the questions.
Oh, that's fine.
What I was wondering as well is, again, using emojis and not necessarily emotional emojis as trend or track points within the system. So if I use that word anger again, and I look into my dictionary and I see a dog and a cat or 2 people, fisticuffs or whatever it is, it gives almost some way of me expressing something in the moment, but also acting as a point in history that I can come back to, or somebody else can come back with me on that point.
So that might be that what you're pointing to is the reason for them being angry.
Yes.
That's a different thing. That's a slightly different thing, in my view. The reason for being angry is one thing, but anger is another.
Just hearing you guys, Johnson, it's interesting. You could have an emoji set or some sort of imagery that you point to, but that opens up a narrative as a storyteller, right? As a professional storyteller. It would open up the book for the therapist then to have a series of information, questions or line that they would then use verbal to dive further into that, to figure out why they're pointing to the dog and cat fighting or why. So it could bring that into a narrative story. So it quickly moves off from something to something else to help.
I like that. Yeah, no, I like that a lot.
And for
Because-
folks who are visual anchorers, I can see like it would help trigger. And actually, that's a separate question I have for you, Neil. But to Johnson's point, like if in the detail part, when I'm doing my assessment, rather than skipping it, I might forget between the time I do the assessment and the time I talk to somebody about it. Like, yeah, why was I feeling that way? There's no reference point for me. So just even like you said, to have something that might anchor me to that could be helpful. But as you are all speaking, I'm thinking about like that piece of trigger. Like, so what preceded this shift for me? If I even know, if I make it more granular than just like my general feeling or emotion broadly, like, was there a triggering event so that I could go, yeah, I was cruising through my day and then this happened. So I decided I'm going to do assessment and see where I'm at on things. And I don't know, and I'm interested in Graham's thinking on this too, just because you think about it from a therapeutic point, like what would you, if you were working with someone therapeutically, would you recommend for intervals on something like this?
Again, for me, it's their world that we're interested in. And we need to try and find out about that world in the least invasive way possible. I have used emojis in the past. It was actually sort of late 90s, early 2000. But that was with a particular specific kind of group, a little bit outside the normal box. It was actually Manchester's youth gang scene, mainly because they used to draw images a lot. Yes, a lot of them were guns and quite a few others were race cars or super fast road cars. But also sometimes you would get a hint of what they'd drawn as to how they were feeling. So I think we get a sense of the person and that might be a good road to go down. But I do tend to use it relatively temporarily for that issue around granulation, because it's easier to do the drawing, and I'm not saying, that's a bad thing. It's a good thing, because certainly in them kind of circumstances, I mean, these were 14 to 17 years old, typically in Manchester in the UK. So I think I was about to say that it's about having tools in your toolbox. And I think anybody in behavior change, from whatever angle, it's about how many different tools have you got in that box. And obviously, the bigger that toolbox is, you can be sure to be able to select something that is more appropriate to that group of individuals or individuals themselves. And I think that's why I'm making that point, really.
I just to add in, words as only part of this, in the sense of how things can be cause trauma. The other, I've done this before. I did a social media post in relation to this. If you take a chimpanzee, the chimpanzee has learnt from its parents, or chimpanzee who's they've learnt from their parents and everything they've watched that a leopard is to be escaped from. They need to get away. All of that behavior has come from what they've seen. If you put a word in front of them that said leopard, it wouldn't do anything. It wouldn't move. Even if that word leopard was in leopard skin, it still probably wouldn't move. It's the whole aspect of what that. So if you've been brought up in that environment where you've got that aspect of what you're learning, what you're seeing, what can be traumatized, clearly you have to take that into consideration as well. So I realize that from our perspective, yes, words, we do look at that, but everything that happens around us is important too.
So you guys, we are, and I use you guys very loosely, but we are at the end of the 90 minutes, and I wanted to let you know what the next steps are. So we will go ahead and send out the recording of this after we, get it transferred over and polished up a bit. We'll make sure that everybody on the call today gets it. We'll be probably doing some editing with it and getting it out to other folks that you want to share it with. And we encourage you to share it because, as you can see, there's so much power in the work that's here and what just what's been shared here today. Any last comments, Neil, Ken, Graham, anybody on the call?
I just want to say thank you to people who've come on and shown their interest in this. And it's been actually a really fascinating conversation discussion as well around many aspects. So, yeah, been great. And thank you, Sarah.
It's our pleasure, actually. We've had a lot of fun in the background working on this with you, for you, and in hopes for a broad spread of the tool. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, David.